Someone has pointed out that I promised to talk about the Catholic Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which occurs today, and I should do so before the day runs out. And it represents a major theological point of divergence between the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and, for example, Anglican and Protestant traditions. Here, therefore, is a sort of analysis as far as I can go in 10 minutes, let's say. The Immaculate Conception was a dogma declared by Pope Pius the Ninth in 1854 through Ineffabilis Deus, and it asserts that Mary, the Mother of God, by a singular grace and a privilege from God, was preserved free from original sin from the first moment of her conception, in view of the merits of her Son, Jesus. So the scriptural basis for this is Luke 1:28, "Hail, full of grace," as interpreted to be evidence of Mary's unique sanctity. Genesis 3:15, "I will put enmity between you and the woman," supports Mary as untouched by Satan's dominion. And Augustine's theology of original sin, which influenced the doctrine, emphasizing the need for Mary to be free from sin in order to bear Christ, on the principle that God cannot stand in the face or cannot live in the face of sin. So a vessel that contains God would not be sinful. And critics argue that the dogma lacks explicit scriptural basis and emerged from medieval scholasticism rather than early patristic consensus. So the Orthodox theology views Mary as a human who inherited ancestral sin but was purified at the Annunciation, and somebody who chose not to sin. The Orthodox veneration of Mary, the Theotokos, the Mother of God, focuses on her active cooperation with grace rather than being a predestined, having a pre-existing exemption from sin. And saints like St. John Chrysostom and Basil the Great emphasize her humanity and personal holiness achieved through this relationship with divine grace. So she is not an intrinsic exemption, she is an intrinsic exemplar of the life that we could all lead. The Orthodox criticism of the Immaculate Conception therefore includes concerns over its theological implications, such as diminishing Mary's moral victory over sin. And Orthodox theology therefore differentiates between inherited corruption, that is ancestral sin, and personal guilt. And this distinction makes the Catholic concept of Mary's exemption from original sin unnecessary. And of course, from that point of view, Orthodox theology does not quite accept the Augustinian understanding of original sin. So original sin for the Orthodox is this ancestral sin is an ancestral potential rather than an actual sin that is automatically inherited, or a personal guilt that is automatically inherited. One can choose, and through grace, one can choose. Anglicans view the Immaculate Conception as a pious opinion rather than a binding dogma. It's tolerated but not affirmed universally within the tradition of Anglicanism, and the doctrine is often criticised as unnecessary and speculative with no clear scriptural foundation. Anglicans would emphasise Mary's role in salvation history as one of grace and faith, without necessarily asserting her being sinless from conception. And some Anglicans share the Orthodox concerns that the dogma projects undue theological innovation into early Christianity. Critics would argue that the Immaculate Conception addresses a speculative problem. How can God become incarnate through a sinful woman? By imposing human logic onto divine action. Both Orthodox and Anglican traditions contend that Christ's divinity and mission are not contingent on Mary's sinless conception. And Orthodox theology would criticize the Immaculate Conception, the doctrine itself, for isolating Mary from humanity. If she is exempt from the consequences of the fall, her humanity might seem different from ours, and therefore undermining the universality of Christ's redemption. All traditions exalt Mary as uniquely holy, full of grace, and the chosen vessel of the incarnation. And the divergence lies in the mechanisms and the implications of her sanctity, with Catholics attributing it to a preemptive act of grace and others emphasizing her moral and spiritual ascent through cooperation with God. And the Catholic Immaculate Conception point remains a point of theological tension with Orthodoxy and Anglicanism, who both see it as unnecessary and overly speculative. The debate further broadens differences in how these traditions interpret original sin, grace, and scriptural authority. Despite this, Mary's central role as the Theotokos and a model of faith unites these traditions in their reverence for her unique place in salvation history, which of course is also paralleled in the Quran. And it's I think it's important to recognize the unifying role of Mary within the two traditions and within the various denominations of Christianity. My own instinct, having been brought up as a Catholic, having with a Jewish bent and with an Orthodox predilection, let's say, which I became Orthodox while I was at Oxford, and I would certainly consider the Immaculate Conception rather like the Assumption simply to be an effort to recognize the importance of Mary and Marian respect and veneration within the context, within the traditions of the various churches. I think Catholicism perhaps has an overly legalistic approach to this, and this would also lead to the arguments over transubstantiation and so on. Orthodoxy tends to be significantly more mystical and vague about the actual nature of the various doctrinal problems that separate Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And I think there's something rather wonderful about the humanity of Mary, and that is something that unites Christianity with Judaism, and is a great positive.